we have Hector Ortega of Ortega Sculptors.
Once I made that decision to be an artist, that's when I knew I had to learn. And that's when I started doing general fabrication to get the skills. You've stepped this up to a point where you have to take this so seriously that this can destroy your life because it's not a hobby anymore. I love fostering people to do things. You know? We all have this power in us to do things in this world and to be part of lifting people up. That path that you choose for yourself and where you want to be in the world may be the hardest goddamn thing for you to do, but you owe it to yourself and society to do it.
Mark your calendars. The 32nd Annual Advanced Laser Applications Workshop will take place from June 17th to 19th at the Suburban Collection Showcase in Novi, Michigan. This event connects manufacturers and suppliers in automotive, aerospace, agriculture, and fabrication. Enjoy 3 days of presentations from leading experts, cutting-edge demonstrations, and fascinating open houses. Discover the latest advancements and applications that are shaping the future of the industry. Visit fmamfg.org to learn more. And now, back to the episode.
Hello, I'm Dan Davis with the Fabricator Magazine. Welcome to the Fabricator Podcast. I'm joined by
Lincoln Bruner with the Tube and Pipe Journal and sometimes the Fabricator.
Yeah, welcome. And we're here at the FMA annual meeting in Chandler, Arizona. We are doing a series of recordings for the podcast, and our first guest is Hector Ortega of Ortega Sculptors, as well as his jewelry making business,
Silver Lining Metal Stamping.
I mean, he's an interesting guy in the sense that he's one of those artists that actually you can tell is an artist.
Yeah,
he's plunged into a lot of things. I mean, stonework and metal, but he really takes his fabrication seriously. But he tries not to take himself too seriously. He's gotten into silversmithing in a big way. I mean, that took up a lot of time to talk about, but it was fascinating.
Yeah, emphasize he likes, large scale metal sculptures, and then everything down to these really small, finite metal stamping.
He said, 3 millimeters
Yeah.
across he's talking about? Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's beautiful work.
Yeah, so lo and behold, we have a large metal. It's partially metals. They're all
Bronze.
metal.
Yeah, there's a big horse sculpture in the lobby of the hotel here that we couldn't really find much information about. So I had to hunt down someone with hotel management. They'd printed off some sort of artwork program thing from 2009.
Yeah, so it's pretty large. I'd imagine 20 feet tall.
Yeah.
So we're at Wild Horse Pass. And apparently there are wild horses and wild burros around this area.
Yeah, but the guy who did the sculpture in the lobby is David A. Montour. I think that's how it's pronounced. But he's a Native American metal artist from around the area.
Also a musician.
And a musician, because after we found out who did the piece, Hector, I was texting with him afterwards. He's like, I've seen that guy perform
There you go.
around here. But it's a cool piece. It's bronze, cactus rib, skeleton rib from a dead cactus, and I think also other wood.
Multimedia, as they would say in the art world.
It's a very detailed piece.
It's a kind of a daring piece. I mean, it captures your attention right away.
So yeah, this is gonna be a good conversation with Hector. Really interesting guy. And please be aware, we might drop some adult words in this conversation. So if you have little kids or people that are not fans of
Language.
certain language, you might want to turn it down quite a bit, or just make sure you're listening to this.
Or if you are a fan of it, turn it up.
Yeah, who's the judge? The non-judgment zone here at the Fabricator Podcast. So enjoy.
Manufacturing and metalworking professionals across Canada, get ready. Don't miss the chance to connect with industry leaders, explore cutting-edge innovations, and gain insights to grow your business. This spring, the Metalworking and Manufacturing Expos are coming to 3 different cities across Canada. Check out the website for upcoming dates and locations. Register now at metalworkingexpo.com. And now, back to the episode.
Welcome back to the Fabricator Podcast. Today's guest, we have Hector Ortega of Ortega Sculptors. Hector, thanks for joining us. We're here in Chandler, Arizona for the FMA annual meeting. You're a local artist, and we were talking a little bit before we started recording about how you got involved working with metal, but it didn't start with metal with you, did it?
No, it didn't start with metal. I started off in the stone industry. I worked at a little rock and mineral store, and at that place, I would take care of machinery. The tumblers that would tumble the stones that you buy at like places and cut and polish stones. And in there was Native Americans that would carve stones, and they would carve these eagles and chiefs and all this stuff. And I was just like, how do you do this? And then that eventually led to them teaching me how to do this on the side, like secretly. When the boss wasn't there, I'd be carving these stones that they gave me, and I carved a little deal. And I remember they told me like, "Oh, you're good. You just need to do this more." I started doing that more, and then eventually I needed to have bases for these things.
Okay.
And I hired these welders, and I would do drawings for them because I always like really hard, crisp lines on my edges and beveled edges and all that stuff. And I draw these things, and I hire these welders, and I never got what I wanted. And it kind of was what I wanted, but it wasn't to the level of detail and like crispness and all that stuff. And I was just like, well, you got to figure out how to do this. You can't just keep paying for this. So I bought a welder. And then that led to discovering the fact that I could actually use metals to do it, and I could build faster, and it would be lighter. Now it's just as heavy,
Yeah.
but it literally just like, I was like, dude, you can make shit fast. You can make all these things that you've seen around that like have inspired you. You can make this. And that threw me into the metalwork,
How old were you then?
So when I first started in stonework, I was probably 18 years old.
Okay.
18 years old, and I did that probably for 2 years when I figured out how I took carved stones. I took a big break to go work for a refrigeration supply, and great experience because I learned about electronics, plumbing, and all the things associated. And the best part about that is I started to learn the importance of reading and knowledge, because a lot of times I would see these salesmen like putting equipment together for like supermarkets and stuff. I was like, well, how do you do that? How do you make all this work? So they're like, it's in the books. I was like, okay. So I started reading all the books, all the technical stuff and all that stuff, because I guess my mind works that way. And then I started putting together those things, and eventually left there just because it just wasn't my thing, I guess. I mean, at the end of the day, I was just drawing the whole time.
Yeah.
I finally got to a point where I was like, dude, what are you doing with your life? Are you cool with this?
Hector, can you stop drawing on the refrigerators, please?
Oh, dude, I do on everything.
Did you?
Everything. I go there now, and they're like, dude, we're still finding your drawings in the books.
That's funny.
I had a great time because I didn't know that I was building skills then for later.
Yeah.
To repair, figure things out, solve problems, technical stuff. And, I did the art thing kind of deal. And then I made that decision to be an artist. And once I made that decision to be an artist, that's when I knew I had to learn. And that's when I started doing general fabrication to get the skills. Started with fences, gates, fixing industrial equipment, and the word got around. Then I was building restaurants and stuff like that. But at the same time, I had to get another job.
Right.
So I worked at this little restaurant, pretty famous place, Pizzeria Bianco. And the guy who owns it, Chris Bianco, he always would kind of like, he's like, oh, we need a table. I'm like, all right, I'll make you a table. And we'd sit there and draw these things while I was working. The other boss was like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be working, not drawing. But we'd be designing furniture for the restaurants and ideas to make things. And then he would hire me to do this, which was awesome because there was people around that could see this. And at the same time, I'm making my own artwork. And it just started kind of getting around. And then eventually I ended up leaving that job and saying, this is what I do. And I started just putting out my stuff and kind of been doing it ever since.
What was it like to be able to finally do it full time? And when was that?
So I finally got to a point where I had so much inventory in large scale sculpture
Oh, wow.
that over the years I was like, what are you doing with this stuff? It's like, it's just sitting back here. They're boat anchors. So I started finding places that were calling for sculpture. And these were places in California, Washington, all over the country. And I was like, okay, well, send them some pictures and see if they want it. You get a little bit of money, and then sometimes there's purchase initiatives, or they just live there. And it's all about sowing seeds.
Right.
And it's kind of an upfront cost to you, which you kind of got to bear. But I think a lot of businesses are like that. It's just a little harder for sculptors.
You're marketing with your work.
We're marketing with our work. Yeah, it's like, it's one of the things about art is like you are nothing without work. So you have to produce, you have to be prolific, which can be a lot to take on. But, some of us like that pain. It's just part of it. You
Yeah.
accept it and you do it,
Right.
So I started taking those things out, and a few pieces have sold, which were like, it was crazy. I was like, oh my God, you sold this thing for like thousands of dollars. That was like a dream. How the hell did you do that?
Right.
And people are like, damn, dude. You just keep going and keep feeds in it. And I did this one project up in Cloverdale, California, and I had designed this big sculpture, and it was the biggest one I had done at the time.
What was
And
it of?
It was basically two 8x8 sheets by 3-inch thick plates. They were fabricated, so it was a bunch of internal structure, and they bent in equal ways and they intersected. It turned into this 3,000-pound thing that I had to figure out how to make. And I missed the deadline because I was having some tools made to bend these arcs in certain directions, and the guy, long story short, we got the thing made, we got it and everything, and then I took off to California on my truck, a little F-150, drove up to California, and then I blew my engine.
Oh, geez.
And like I had exhausted every resource that I had.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
And I blew up my truck on the way to delivery. You just destroyed your life for this piece of art. And then I had to suck it up and call for help. My brother's like, dude, what the fuck? And then he comes with his truck, and then we're like moving trucks and trailers. We get it there. And I remember before I left, I was still at the other job. I was like, I'll be back in a couple weeks. And I just never came back. And it just kind of, that hardship was like the catalyst to me being like, all right, you've stepped this up to a point where you have to take this so seriously that like this can destroy your life if you don't take this as serious as you need to.
Wow.
Because it's not a hobby anymore. This
Right.
is like serious like money. This is serious ramifications to the decisions you make. And that was a great thing, and I always think it's like I can still go back to the restaurant and work if I want to.
Yeah.
Probably. I may be doing something shitty, but whatever,
Right.
But that was that moment. That was in 2017 or no, 2016, I think it was. And that piece later on stayed in California for 2 years. I brought it down to Tucson and like this last ditch Hail Mary, I'll put it in this show. And someone bought it and donated it to the city.
Wow.
And now it sits at a park. And
Oh
it's
my
part
goodness.
of the community,
Oh my goodness.
which is insane to me, and the whole thing was about that sculpture. It was off this theory that I had. It was called constrained geometries. Because I think about geometry all the time, and then you think about these elemental shapes, squares, triangles, and everything. I was like, what's the highest and best thing you can do with these shapes? And it was two squares with two ends flipped up at a radius. And it was two of them. You put them together. Super simple, but it made this like complex geometry that just like
Right.
somehow spoke to someone that I had no idea would ever spoke to.
And continues to do.
Yeah, exactly. My life is bound to some universal language of geometry that I tend to emanate from my experiences of life.
And that's in Tucson?
That's in Tucson, yes.
You were mentioning before that you do quite a bit of work in Tucson.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
So I've been involved with an organization, Sculpture Tucson, for a number of years. And this is this organization that basically their mission is to bring opportunities to sculptors to help us gain sustainable livings and improve not only our lives as artists, but the community's lives. you know, because a lot of the art that we do isn't necessarily for individuals. It kind of tends to be in public spaces, corporations, parks, and stuff like that. And there's very little opportunity for people to actually break into it. So they're kind of a catalyst to bring, you know, through their donors and all that, the work they do, they bring us opportunities to create. And they kind of bring through their community that they've been building over the years, they bring in buyers and stuff. And that's so beneficial to us. You know, anytime you have people that were artists trying to help artists, and then these artists are making art, trying to bring their work to, you know, the as-built world to improve people's lives and everything, it's pretty awesome. Yeah. So I've done a bunch of commissions down there. I still participate. I just did another big sculpture for him. It's on my Instagram, big round turny thing. It's pretty sweet.
You do a lot of kinetic?
That was my first kinetic piece.
Oh, wow.
Actually,
Okay.
I've done one other kinetic piece, but this is the largest one I've had to do. Pretty stoked on it. It's not kinetic in the sense of like, where it's just always activated.
Right.
It's so heavy that like, but the cool thing is it's so heavy, and I just saw it last weekend, that the wind will push it. So weather vanes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think it's 11.6 tall, 9 foot wide. You know, the whole total weight of it, I think it's 3,000 pounds.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Huh.
core 10 and stainless.
But will it blow out an engine? Can it do
Well,
that?
it didn't.
Yeah.
I've upgraded to the F350.
Yeah.
Yeah, the F150
That's
done.
funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you like, is metal pretty much your primary material of choice nowadays?
Yeah, metal is my primary material of choice. I have no preference on metals. It's all the same stuff.
So I asked that because you mentioned the Corten stuff, and a lot of, you know, it's sitting out there, and to me, you know, the ability to embrace something that weathers is, you know, it's kind of cool because it's the mental image to somebody that doesn't know better. they're thinking like, who did this? It's rotting away. but it, you know, it's part of the piece itself.
It is part of the piece itself. And what I like about core 10 is like, it's the material.
Yeah.
You know, you let it oxidize, it encapsulates itself. It's got a long lifespan. It's a weathering steel, and it works really well in a lot of environments.
Structural, obviously.
Structural, you know, it's
main use. Yeah.
yeah, structural main use, you know, weathering applications. It's just pretty. It's a pretty thing. It's very subdued and stuff like that. There's been a lot of artists that have used it, and I love it. You
So
know,
do you get into the weathering effects of certain type of maybe finishes on metal and stuff like that? The only reason I'd done an article for our publication maybe a couple years back, in like the amount of time spent on, I had no idea. Usually, you know, I equate it to just a powder coating or like a liquid
Yeah.
coat, but you get special effect type on the way things weather, like kind of
Yeah,
altering that.
there is ways of doing it. You know, there's like you can accelerate it, you can
Right.
sandblast. There, and like you say, it's a lot of time to figure these things out.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I'll either get them sandblasted or I will acid etch them and then neutralize them. And then if I feel, depending on the client or the situation or what I'm doing, I might oil them, which works really cool because all of a sudden you have this like rusty thing. It can look totally rusty and old, but then once you start oiling these things, they start to turn into like a finished piece where they have a sheen like they're brand new,
Wow.
even though they're old. I don't get too much into like applied stuff just because there's liability.
Yeah.
You know, so
Some of that stuff can get pretty nasty too,
It
just working
can.
with it.
yeah, exactly. You know, the clear coats and stuff like I have been painting stuff, and that's been, you know, a learning experience.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you start off at the hardware store using those paints and they fail. And then you start digging through the internet, like what is everybody using? And then that's a rabbit's hole. You know, then you go to manufacturer, I'm like, what are you using to paint cranes?
Yeah.
I need that paint. you
Yeah.
know, and I did that to PPG
Yeah.
here in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
valley, and they're like, "Oh, we use this." I'm like, "How much is it?" I'm like, "Oh shit." I'm like, "Fuck." You know, I was like, "Give me that stuff," and I've switched to the PPG paints for the metals. The
So it's serious. I mean, you're doing industrial strength type finishes on
Yeah.
some of this stuff.
But
Yeah.
you have to. I mean, you were kind of alluding to that before. Is like you find out what it really costs. Like, well, this is for real now. This is not a hobby. and you sort of bite off those risks one at a time, right? But with the painting, it sounds like you've really gotten into it in terms of like the actual chemistry and usage, and
You have to, because it's your reputation. You know, it's your reputation. You can paint something with a hardware store in a year. It's gonna, you know, you're gonna have one pinhole somewhere, and it's gonna rust from underneath. That stuff's gonna peel, and then you're gonna. What happens if that sculpture is in Utah?
Right,
You
right,
know, I'm
right.
gonna go out to Utah and repaint this thing.
Yeah.
That sucks. So
Yeah.
it's like, you know what I mean? So, you know, learning about that and finding the right stuff is really important. It's a lot of time, finishes and stuff like that.
So do you do commission pieces?
I do commissions every now and then as they pop up. The majority of the stuff I do is based on just me kind of growing. I do some shows here and there. I'm skipping this year's Tucson sculpture show just because I need a break.
Yeah.
This last 4 years have been like the most successful years I've had in my life. And I got sick at the end of the year after doing a ton of work. And I was like, you might need to like take care of the ship a little bit more to make sure we can keep going.
Right.
And it was just basically exhaustion. It was like
Yeah.
I was just doing too much mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion. Spent a month at home, not doing anything because I just couldn't think and do stuff. You know,
Right.
overworked myself.
Yeah. No, it's an issue.
Yeah, it is an issue, especially when, you know, as small business owners and you're doing everything.
Yeah.
That is a lot to manage.
And there's a creative bent to it. And if your
Yep.
mind's not in the right place, you're not going to get the most out of your key asset.
Exactly. You know, it's like what I find for me is that I have to check out on certain parts of aspects of everything. So it's like if I'm going to design, the world shuts off, Hector's going to design. If Hector's going to fabricate, all the other shit don't matter because I got to get the shit done. You know, if we're going to, you know, apply for things, we need to just focus on that because when you have all these different things coming in, it can be overwhelming. And you can get to that point where you have so much to do that you are not getting anything done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it becomes that overwhelming feeling of like, what the hell? What? It's crazy.
My wife tells me I can't multitask. Even
But
But I
I'm
would
not
like- yeah.
I'm okay.
Our wives have been talking.
I think I'm okay at it, but there's a certain point where like you just have to do it.
yeah.
You have to do it and you have to push it on so you can get, you know, prioritize those processes.
Before we started recording, you were talking about you were doing a yoga class that was geared towards tradespeople.
Yes. So this year I have some friends. My friend Scott Mills from Ironwood Mills. He's a woodworker. He basically gets like trees from the city and like from the environment, and he mills them down and like sells lumber, makes furniture and stuff like that. And his
Does the city know he's doing this?
Oh, yeah.
it's like contractors like just cut down a giant
Roving
tree and
gang of beavers.
they're gonna scrap it, but it's a beautiful huge eucalyptus tree.
Yeah.
And he's got, you know, the saw to cut them. He has his own kiln to dry them, and he does like these amazing pieces of furniture, like super expensive, high quality. He does metalworking, but he's like me. He works hard, you know, even though he has help. He's got a business. They have a lot of things, and his partner is really big into yoga, and so they started this thing called the Dirty Dummies Yoga. And at first I was like, I don't know. He's like, dude, it'd be really good for you. It's geared toward us dudes that abuse our bodies on a daily basis. We need to take care of ourselves. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. Started doing it. And I was like, oh my God, I need this just to stretch your back out once a week, to feel your body and what it does for you and what you're asking for it to do, to just sit back and just be like, okay, I'm human. I'm not a machine, is a huge thing.
I imagine it's more comfortable being with your community as well, as opposed to like walking in with some working moms. And,
Yeah,
you know, and
it's a totally different
and
situation.
you've been singled out because you're not quite bending the way they're bending.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been a big help about it. You know, I've told a few friends who are like, I don't know if I can do that. I'm like, okay. You know, eventually back's gonna hurt. I'm like, hey, was that still going on? I'm like, yeah, let's go. You know, and then they'll get into it. And it's just really good because like we all work hard and we all need to like, you know, kind of nurture this body that is allowing us to do this, to make a living, keep going.
Flexibility really helps one age more gracefully than they might otherwise.
Yes.
And I have yet to heed that warning.
You were telling us before about a little bit of educational activity. You're teaching other people, younger people.
So another part of like, I not only do I do large scale public art and sculptures and all that stuff. I make jewelry and I make the tools for jewelry, and the jewelry is more like kind of like sells my tools and stuff like that. And these are like kind of creative breaks that I do, but I teach the metal smithing component that I do, that I specialize in, and that's metal stamping. A few times a year at local studios, I will do classes where I teach silversmiths how to, learn how to make impressions in metal with the tools I make and the tools that are available. Super rewarding. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, I love fostering people to do things. We all have this like power in us to do things in this world, and to be part of like lifting people up and being like, you're a badass too, do it.
Right.
And then they do it and you're like, holy shit. This person's badass. That's awesome. That inspires me and makes me want to do better. And it's a big circle.
It kind of, you mentioned this before we went to recording, it kind of harkens back to even the past in a way, and connecting that in this part of the world. I mean, there's a tangent connection between what you're doing now and what was done in the past.
Absolutely. It's one of the things you can probably see on some of my jewelry. I made all the tools from this, and a lot of these designs, as simple as they are, they harken back to centuries before us. Things that have traveled from India to Europe to Africa to the Americas and out into the States. And one thing that I keep seeing is the more I design these little metal stamping tools that make these tiny designs on metal, is that us as humans share in this like divine geometry that like binds us all, like aesthetically, the way we look at things and the way we see beauty and the way we create beauty from people that are like totally disconnected. We all share this. And it's like air, it's like water, it's like fire. I don't know. It's I've done sculpture shows in the past, and like I'll walk in and I'll see someone else's work, and I'm like, I'll see their forms, like the 3-dimensional forms. I'm like, you think the same way I do. I don't know you, but there's something that connects us both, even though there is no connection between us.
Right.
But we share in that vocabulary of form and thought and like order. I don't know what that is. And
you've observed nature in a way that's similar, and you're recreating things out of metal or silver, different media that mimic what you've noticed, right? But then you've got also your personal take on it. And, before recording, we were talking about like these kind of centuries old stamping techniques that were brought over from Spaniards, and obviously Mexico being the silversmithing mecca that it is, now up to here. What is it about working with silver in particular? You've mentioned it a few times that just kind of grabs your mojo. And
the thing for silver and the jewelry work for me, the way I got into it is because I was making large scale sculpture, spending blowing thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours, months at a time, and I just knew I needed. There's no reward while you're doing the work.
Yeah.
You just committed to this thing, this beast this idea. You're like, fuck, I'm doing this. What am I doing? And I remember I was like, you just need something just to give you a pick me up. And I was like, I'm just going to try to make a piece of jewelry. And I made a piece of jewelry. And I remember after I made it in the middle of a big project, I was like, God, that feels good.
Yeah.
And the cool thing was all those big metalworking skills were exactly what I needed to make that little thing. Like I knew what I was doing. I was like, holy shit, it's the same thing. It's just tiny fiddly work. And I just kept going with it. And that connection with the materials at a small, tiny scale, because we do things that are like 3 millimeters in diameter for people. And, to be working on large scale and then to have to switch your mind to do small things has really helped my large scale work and everything in general to have more sensitivity to materials, metal forming, all the decisions that need to be made to make something, are applied there. It's like it gets to a granular level. Has led me into machine work and other things to try to figure out how to do things more efficiently and all.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. I like that dichotomy of large and small.
Right.
I can do something this big, and I can do something that big.
So do you do your own machining?
I do some of it, yeah.
Oh,
I do
wow.
some of it. I get to a certain point in some of these projects that, like, if we're doing like some of the tool and die work or maybe fixtures that, like, I don't have room for all the tools. And I have a good friend that I hire, old retired guy, and he is a wealth of knowledge. And what's cool is that, like, I'm like, oh, I need this, and then, like, him and I will make it, but I'll pay him. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Right.
I'm learning at the same time with all his years of experience and stuff like that. I have my own mill, I have my own lathe, I have a bunch of lasers, and it's cool. It's cool stuff. Getting granular with things, like, really opens up your mind, but it also convolutes your mind when you're trying to be a machinist welding, and that don't work sometimes. You know what I mean? you gotta skip the thous and add a bunch of them to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you still find that you have enough involvement with metal fabricating that it keeps you sharp with your skills?
Absolutely. I mean, I fabricate everything, even on the tool level. I'm still making all the stuff. I'm still acquiring tools to bend things. I'm still doing all that stuff myself. So I keep getting better and better and better, and making it harder and harder and harder. But that's okay, because the work gets better, and opportunities grow as I grow.
Yeah. Does your education continue with your desire to do something different? It seems like there's been kind of a theme from our conversation so far.
So when I first got into the metalworking, and in high school, I took drafting classes and stuff like that, and I did really well at those. Then, like I mentioned, that I went to working, and I was going to college at the time, but I was just doing, like, the general thing. I was like, oh, you go there, get your degree, and this and that. There's always art involved in there, but I didn't know that I was going to be an artist. I hadn't made the decision that I could be an artist.
Right.
And then I made the decision to be an artist, and I was like, oh my God, this is hard. We're doing this, but we're making stuff and we're being successful. But I got a divorce, and then there was this point where I was like, oh, dude, you got to figure out your life. I went back to school. I went back into an architectural drafting program because my whole goal was to figure out more sustainability in the arts and still be in that creative side. So I was like, architectural drafting design, let's go do this. Went back, and I, like, aced it. It was like cake. Like, it was like, I was like, why didn't you do this in the beginning?
Right.
You've got like 5 AAs, dude, and this is the one, dude.
You weren't ready for it.
I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know, and then my whole thing, as I started progressing, I was fortunate in my upbringing to have parents that were architects. So I always saw that the world that they created was done by their minds and hands. And that always was like, wow. And I think that's how I got into sculpture, because I'd play on the sculptures, I'd see their artwork, and we drew, and that was just part of life. And going back into that on educational level, I started to realize this is how these guys are communicating these ideas to the world. These abstract concepts of space and form and how things work together, materials and everything comes together, is the language of architecture, space, construction, and all that stuff. And it's all bound through education. And it's funny because, like, during the school process, I would get these, like, fab jobs, and the teacher would be like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, just designing a restaurant on the side,
That's all.
I'm like real world making plans and stuff. And they're like, okay. And then we designed buildings, and then I'd always put sculptures in them. And then I was like, oh, this is how you communicate this. You need to learn this rendering stuff and all these things, so you just don't sound like you're a crazy guy. Oh, we're gonna make this, and people are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So now that had, like, opened up my eyes to learning how to use those things to communicate in a language that other people can understand. Which is been really instrumental for me because that's the foundation of everything for me. It all starts with the pen, the paper, the idea. If you can draw it, you can build it.
Right.
That's my thing. And I don't like to draw a lot because if I draw it, I might have to build it. And
Darn it.
yeah, it's a weird thing.
But
You know?
you've mentioned you've got some things drawn that you haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah,
But yeah.
there's a bunch of stuff, and it's like I don't want to draw more unless the resources are there and all that stuff because it weighs on you. You start putting more on yourself. So when my time is, it's like I have to manage my time and my creativity because I can just keep going and going and going. But it's been really cool. The education does not stop, you know. So I make tools. Well, then you learn how to heat treat. You learn how to forge. You learn how to do all those techniques. You learn all that stuff, you know. And then I started hand engraving things, you know, because I thought, oh, this would be cool.
Yeah.
Add this technique, and then all of a sudden you start making these things that are like it takes you a week to engrave. And you
Right.
can't sell it.
Right.
You're like, how do you bring this art to somebody else?
Yeah.
And that led me to lasers, programming lasers, drawing, learning how to draw on the computer, like not technical stuff, you know. And my mind keeps going and going. You know, now we've got CNC plasma cutters and learning how to do all that and harness all these machines to do things is extremely powerful.
And sounds like it's very compelling to you. It's like sparks your
Oh,
creativity.
it
Sparks your
is. I mean, the power that like fabricators have now to harness, you know, modern tools and machinery and software to build real world things is insane.
Yeah.
Is insane. You know, I always think about like if all these fabricators weren't governed by economics,
Right.
what would they make? The world would be a whole different world, you know, because all these assumptions and things that we kind of have to put aside for like, you know, resources and all that stuff kind of convolutes things. But if we didn't have those and more people were taking even more risk with their ideas and all that stuff, this world would be completely different, you know. And that's like that's my take because there's a lot of smart people out there.
No, I mean, it's the nature of the business almost, right?
Yeah.
Like problem solving.
Yeah, massive problem solving. And it's like it leads to it's like you solve the problem, then you learn you have to learn this to solve the next problem.
Right. Right.
And it keeps
What have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, totally. And it's just like snowballing thing. But at the end of the day, you start to be like, I mean, I don't think learning ever stops, you know, for fabricators or all that problems is always there. And it just makes you better and better and more efficient.
Do you outsource anything?
I don't. Sometimes processes, like if I need something rolled that I don't have the machinery
Okay,
for, I'll
yeah.
outsource some stuff. I do hire people from time to time that like want to learn, and they suffer equally. You know, it's like when it's time to grind, we grind. You know, and it's like there's something like, man, you have to come out here day after day and do this, and I'm like, yeah, like that's what it takes to make it as an artist, and that's what it takes to make it as a metal worker. It's not just weld it and leave it. You weld it and you grind it, and you have to grind that right, you know, and you know the grinding.
or else it ends up looking like the guys you originally rejected for the bases.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
know, it's like we have certain standards that we live up to. You know, I'm very particular about my grinding. You know, it's like if you grind it the wrong way, the shadow of light will hit and you'll see ripples. So if you don't do it the right way, you got to redo it. You know, and it takes more time.
We need to get you a abrasive disc consumable deal.
That's
Yeah,
right.
seriously.
Yeah,
seriously.
if anyone
wild
out
But
there,
I
yeah.
will say 3M Cubitron.
There you go.
Dude,
Actually,
those things
they-
have changed my life.
They're occasional friends of our program. Is there anything that you don't have now that you'd like to have in your shop?
I'd like to have a laser cutter.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. I like my plasma and it's great for like the larger scale stuff. But
Yeah.
if I could have the kerf width that the laser has,
Mm-hmm.
I could actually start to bring my engraved designs onto the surfaces of my large scale work. Eventually I'll have one. I mean, it's, you know, I've already put it in my head.
Right.
You know, it's just a matter of just doing what I got to do.
How large of a bed would you need or would want?
I don't think I need a big one, just a 5x10.
Okay.
You know,
All
5x10
Yeah.
would be really beneficial. You know, it's funny. A lot of my tools, I get people, and you know, art's one of those things that like kind of ebbs and flows, and they're like, "Well, you could be selling stuff on cutting stuff out for people on your plaza. I'm like, dude, I didn't buy that to like
Right.
make shit for other people. That's my art making machine, dude.
Yeah.
It's my job to program that for what I want, you know?
Yeah.
And I think the laser, I would probably break that rule. Just
Yeah.
because laser is just badass, you know? It's just a higher quality.
Yeah. You know, the thing that strikes me is that you have a good idea of how to make it as an artist. You've worked at it, but you also know the necessities of what need to take place to make it
Oh, yeah.
sustainable, to use the phrase.
Yeah.
Is that something you think other people get or are knowledgeable about when they want to pursue this track?
I think at first a lot of people don't get it. I think they think that you can do the one thing. But the thing about art is that you are not bound to the same principles of business as a lot of industries are. So it's like, you know, you make a product and you sell it. In art, it's like you make a product and you may not sell it. So you have to make the next product. So anything you can do to keep making things and to diversify yourself ensures your sustainability. And that's why I make tools for silversmiths. That's
Yeah.
why I make random hammers, and keeping that spark alive and following your intuition to like where your creative endeavors goes comes a long way, because at the end of the day, you can do all these things and then have even more opportunity if you just dumped everything into one thing,
Right.
you know. It's kind of like a it's like a diamond, you know. The more facets on there, the prettier it looks, and the more opportunity you have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot to take on and stuff like that. But, you know, I remember in the beginning, I did do an apprenticeship in the beginning with a very well-known sculptor here in the Valley. And he just says, I was like, how do you do this? And he's like, you just have to keep doing it. He's like, this is brutal. It's like art calls people out so fast because of what do you call it? And he's like, if you just keep doing this, you will be the one.
Mm-hmm.
And that always stuck with me. And he's like, you have to work harder than the others when you're not making it. And you have to keep working when there's no work.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out how to do that. And that's a tricky thing,
Yeah.
you know?
Is that the Arcform studio?
Yes.
Who runs that studio?
So that was artist Michael Anderson. He's now retired and stuff. Yeah. I worked with him for years. And it was, the funny thing is like, I remember one year I went there knocking on the door. Hey, I'd love to. And he was like, no. The next year I went back, but I came back with like this ghetto little form. And I was like, dude, I want to work with you. Can you show me how or whatever? I'll even work for free. And I'd work there 3 days a week for free while having another job. And then I'd have 2 days a week to do my work. And that was like, I was making nothing. But and the funny thing is, he didn't really teach me anything. I just watched.
Yeah.
He didn't want me working on his stuff.
Right.
He just knew that, like, I think it was a test. Eventually, we got to the point where he'd like, let's make this stuff. You know, he'd get projects in because he was also making work for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became a hired gun, you know, and then we made some sculptures, and then we had a show. And I remember after we did this show, we sold a big old piece, and I was like, I can't believe I did that. It was like my first like large scale kind of sculpture, and we sold it. And he's like, Hector, I think you got to go. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
We're just getting started. But I understand. It's like,
Yeah.
I got to that point where it's time for me to do it,
Right.
you know, and that was kind of difficult to understand, but I'm grateful for that, because then it was all on me to acquire all this other shit that I didn't have, learn all the stuff that I didn't learn, that only I had to learn,
Right.
that only I could learn on my own, you know, and a great experience.
Yeah.
It's interesting, over the years you've gathered about yourself a lot of mentors,
Yes.
a lot of people to learn from.
Yes.
Is that, I probably know the answer to this, but is that how do you think younger artists, younger fabricators can go about doing the same thing to ensure their own success?
Sometimes you do have to reach out to find those people, but I think there's a lot of people that are already out there that are doing that for you.
Okay.
Like none of these, like the people and the mentors that I have haven't really been there in the sense of like me asking them what to do or any of that stuff. They've just been there as like, you're doing good, keep doing, and it's simple little things like that that keep us going, that kind of validate us, even though we're going through madness and stuff like that. So I really think that, like, starting, if it's something completely different, you just need to involve yourself in those areas, and then really listen to people, how they conduct themselves, because a lot of art and a lot of what we do is based on the relationships and how we treat people, and I've been very blessed that people, I, I want everyone to succeed. I want everyone to gain success in whatever they do. And if I can help a little bit, I will, you know? Um, and I just think listening and then being very observant, and then ultimately it's following your path. And I think, and I always talk about this, following your path and staying on path. That path that you choose for yourself and where you want to be in the world may be the hardest goddamn thing for you to do, but you owe it to yourself and society and all the people that love you and around you to do it. And that can be extremely difficult when you have to weigh money, time, family, resources, and all that stuff, because eventually there comes this point where it's like you're questioning morality and stuff like that when it comes to money and all this stuff. And sometimes you're left with decisions that are selfless, and staying on path is important. And I think that leads you to those people that come in and interject your life for certain reasons to, like, guide you and help you. Um, I'm not the best at asking for help at all. But I've been blessed that I've been able to put myself out there through my decision to do this, that it has drawn people to kind of lead and influence me in the proper way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
like this weird thing, it's like art, sculpture, metalworking, all that stuff is like, it's a spiritual thing for me. It's we did a show for Sculpture Tucson, and like they were like, "Oh, you need to make all these sculptures. Do you have a theme?" I'm like, "No, I don't have a theme. I'm just gonna make a bunch of stuff, and we're gonna fill it up. We're gonna start with ideas and whatever." But as we started going along, I was like, "I have an idea of a theme," and it was called Emanate, and it was all because I was randomly searching on YouTube, and I got on thermodynamics and about how energies transform from one thing to another, and I was like, holy shit, you're just like that, dude. You're this one thing, Hector, this soul in the world. And you take your energy and it is transmuting into these objects, and you're setting them out. And then those objects have an impact on people, whether they resound with them or not immediately. These sentinels you make through art, sculpture, tools are doing something to affect other people's lives. It's like this ripple effect from what we all carry inside, and it's different for everyone. Lawyers do it, doctors do it, engineers do it. We're doing it, this podcast is doing it. Yeah, that's a world focus on something, and it goes out to your guys' deal, and it builds and builds, and as long as it's positive and good, we're solid, So yeah, it's a weird thing, and it's something I think about all the time because we're constantly questioned with, what are we doing?
Yeah.
We're making art, and I love that we're making art, but
Right.
there's so much other stuff pulling us away from it. None of the stuff that I make is supposed to exist, but it's my job to make it exist.
Right. Wow.
And that's a lot of responsibility on me,
Yeah.
but I'm cool with it. Apparently,
What's some of your favorite projects out there?
my favorite projects for that I have, it's probably the last one. The last one I did was that kinetic piece for Sculpture Tucson. And it was, it's always the last one.
Right. Yeah.
It's like I can't think of, and it's just because I'm growing with each step.
Mm-hmm.
I just did a really big piece, and it's kind of like was like the one before that I delivered to that I took a huge risk on, the largest one I've done, which went to Pennsylvania. And that was called Salvation, because I remember when I did it, I revisited the forms that I had started with, and I brought them back, and then I made the largest piece, and then I put it out, and somehow it sold through the grace of the universe, delivered it to, Pennsylvania, which is a dream come true, to take it all the way across the country and save my ass. Sculptures always saved my ass.
You said that was like a rebar piece, right?
No,
This is something different?
This is a big 18-foot long square. I started the square right before I blew up my truck.
Oh, wow.
So that square, this big frame, I was working on 2 pieces of insanity.
Yeah.
Pain. Almost started another one at the same time. So I started this thing. Then I got bit with reality. I put this thing away, and it sat there for all these years until I got the opportunity to make a large scale solo show.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's evolved to a smaller version of that. And I'm still playing with that geometry. So, I'm just excited to see where it all goes. I want to keep getting larger and larger, but we're starting to get into this zone where we really need that to be funded.
Yeah.
To like that next level of, Mark DeSuver or Richard Serra, scale,
Right. Is that something you'd like to follow up on?
Oh, absolutely. I'm already thinking about acquiring land just to put like one sculpture on,
No kidding. Wow.
and having it be a multi-year kind of process, designing something, acquiring a piece of land and just throwing one giant sculpture on there.
Wow.
I mean, that's just stupid, but
Yeah.
but what am I mean, how am I going to do that?
No,
But see, if I throw that idea out there,
Yeah.
who the fuck knows? There may be someone out there that says, dude, that sounds great. I got a piece of land.
Yeah.
I'll pay for it. I don't know, because you just don't know,
Yeah.
and that's kind of that risk taking and whatever. I really think that people, should invest in themselves. And I think risk taking is part of
Right.
in investing in yourself.
It's a little entrepreneurial streak, which is something you don't normally equate with artistic endeavors.
Yeah, it's not, it's like, it's really easy to just do the same thing over and over and over. For me, it's really hard to do that.
Oh, yeah. No.
For me, I'm like, why am I going to do that again? With tools, it's different because I know it's going into different hands and there's different influences that those designs can do. But with like sculpture and art, I feel like you always have to keep progressing, but you keep drawing from that vocabulary that you've built, that geometric vocabulary. So it kind of is the same, but it isn't the same.
Where can people find out more about you and your work?
You can find out about me on my Instagram. I have 2 Instagrams, Silver Lining Metal Stamps on Instagram, and then hman4200 on Instagram as well. So the hman4200 is my sculpture stuff, the large scale work, and then the Silver Lining Metal Stamps is the jewelry tool work stuff.
Got anything? Questions, Gare?
Yeah, you were talking about some of your inspirations. Are there any metal sculpture artists that you kind of look up to?
As far as influences, it's more going to be people in the past. It's going to be Mark DeSuvero, Albert Paley, Michael Anderson, who I trained with. Really, I try not to look at too much art because it's so easy to imprint other stuff without subconsciously. You see something and then you're like, oh, I don't have a problem with that in like the jewelry end because that's a type of ornamentation that's different. It's more motif based and stuff like that. But with like my large scale work, I want it to be as me as possible. I will take quickly look at some stuff, but I think social media is hard because when you start looking at other people's work, there's all this other stuff implied, even though it isn't. It's like I know that even those big sculptors are suffering just as much. There's that same thing you just don't take out.
Right.
But
So
everything's
it's like-
happy and positive on social media. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It all looks like, oh man, you're freaking killing it. I'm like, yeah, I'm killing it, but I'm killing me. You know what I mean?
I need to go back to yoga.
Yeah, exactly. I need that. So I try not to look too much at everything. And I want to keep it as pure as I can. It is nice to look at some stuff every now and then and see different stuff that's in museums. Really inspires me. People that have gotten to that place. I'm inspired by like simple stuff, like really, like when you go to the park and you see this little addition that some artist did. To me, I'm like, dude, that's awesome. You made that happen. And it's living in the community. People are looking at it. They may not like it, but who cares? You did this. This is awesome.
Being out in the midst of the world, to me, is like that's something that's worth celebrating. Don't know the story of how it got there, don't know the pain of process,
It
but
can be scary.
yeah,
can be very
yeah.
scary.
But it's out there, and it's you may not get it,
Yeah.
but you have to appreciate it because someone else probably does get it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the cool thing about like sculpture and stuff. It's like it means something different. Might mean one thing to me, but to someone else it has a whole different perspective. And then like to hear when people are like, oh, look, and I'm like, whoa, that's profound. I didn't even
Yeah.
think about it like that. You just like hit me in the head. And now I can think about this differently and what it's doing and take that in and then do something else,
Yeah, art's important.
It is important. It's very important, It's like music. It's like one of those things that we all live with, and sometimes we take for granted.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It's simple little things. It's like when you see a leaf fall from the tree, there's a beauty in that.
right.
And there's those little tiny things and reminders that we're human.
Yeah, capitalism provides us a structure in which to live, but man, it gets tiring.
Oh yeah.
you need
Yeah.
you need an outlet.
You definitely
Yeah.
do. We all do, So anything, like my thing is, as I rise up, people are going to rise up with me. My supporters are going to go with me, this, that, and anyone that's going to be around me, we're in this together, and let's make this the best we can.
So check Hector out on his socials. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's been
Fantastic.
a pleasure.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, you're an interesting guy, man. I wish,
Crazy.
I know. I wish I had a little bit of the depth you have.
Come on.
Yeah. Well,
if you
grind for like 2 months straight. Yeah, and then you're gonna be like, oh yeah, I get it.
you mentioned that as like the getting testing people if they're really willing to get into the metal fab business, and I think I'd be walked out after I tried to meet someone's standards of excellent grind.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's times that I want to quit. I'm just like, fuck. Hector, you could have just like figured out how to make like shitty welds part of your aesthetic. You know what I mean?
Life would be so
Sometimes-
much easier.
Totally, dude. And then I've seen people do that. And I mean, they're solid welds, but they're just not the prettiest, but they've made it part of their deal. And I'm like, damn, dude, that's brilliant. It's pretty cool.
I don't know if other welders like that though.
No, they do. The welding thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole nother thing.
That's a whole other thing,
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. If you have any comments, questions, complaints, reach us at podcast@fmamfg.org. Okay, I knew I'd get it. Thanks to the team. Thank you, Hector.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. Goodbye.
Did you put a question mark at the?
Sounds like my Paul Harvey. Good day.
The Fabricator Podcast is a production of Fabricators and Manufacturers Association, located in Elgin, Illinois. The show is hosted by Dan Davis and the staff of FMA Communications. The podcast is produced by Gareth Slager and recorded and edited by Griffin Hammond and Dana Weicker. Sales support provided by Andy Flando. Additional production support by Elizabeth Gavin, Mike Owens, Billy Culpa, Pat Simon, Brandon Geyer, and me, Sarah Spring. Email us at podcast@fmamfg.org. Thank you for listening.
Roving gang of beavers.